Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2019 movie titled Point Blank. Please be advised that there might be spoilers ahead. The film begins with a loud gunshot, followed by a man sprinting. He shelters behind a tree as bullets fly past him. He fights back and shoots one of his attackers. As he attempts to flee, he desperately calls his getaway driver. The driver informs him that he will arrive shortly. While sprinting, the man is accidentally hit by a car. The cops arrive, forcing his getaway driver to flee immediately. The scene shifts to Paul, a typical guy who lives with his pregnant wife, Taryn. She's excited for their baby's arrival and wants Paul to complete preparing the nursery. The news reports on a new terrible tragedy. District Attorney Joshua Gregory is the latest victim in a succession of high-profile attacks. Meanwhile, Paul's phone rings, indicating the beginning of his workday. When he arrives at the hospital, we witness a dedicated nurse ready for another day of patient care. At the district attorney's premises, Detective Eric Masterson investigates the crime scene, attempting to determine what transpired. Lieutenant Regina Lewis joins him, explaining that she was the first person on the scene and did her best to assist. Masterson tries to persuade Lewis that Joshua was not fully unprotected. During their conversation, Detective Jones mentions that 2 victims with gunshot wounds have recently been admitted to the area hospitals. With this news, the crew moves to pursue the clue. Abe is in the hospital with a nasty concussion and is out of the cold. Paul discovers the window is open, and a man jumps in and begins hitting him. The attacker steals Paul's ID card and flees. Soon after, Paul makes a comment to Lewis, and they speak briefly before she hands him her business card. Janet, the manager, instructs Paul to take the rest of the night off, and he goes home. He tells his wife what occurred, and she feels little frightened. As Paul walks to the toilet, he gets struck from behind. The perpetrator also strikes his wife before returning to knock Paul unconscious. Later, Paul awakens when his phone calls, and he hears his wife's panicked screams and sobs. The guy on the phone informs Paul that he has gotten himself embroiled. He tells Paul to return to the hospital and get his brother out without speaking to anyone, or his wife will be in danger. Paul rushes to the hospital, gazing at the card Lewis handed him. He receives a message directing him to call back after he departs. Overwhelmed, Paul feels dizzy in the restroom, but he forces himself to act. He takes Janet's card and begins filling a bag with several medications. He exits peacefully and enters Abe's room, spotting a cop guarding the patient. Paul convinces the officer that Abe should be escorted to the imaging section downstairs, and the officer agrees to accompany them. As they wheel Abe down the hallway, the 2 investigators enter the hospital. Paul takes the lift to the 3rd underground level, while the cop is preoccupied by his phone. The investigators talk about Abe and his brother, street mercenaries who work for someone named Big D and allegedly owe him money. Meanwhile, in the lift, Paul disconnects the cable, as if Abe's heart has stopped. The cop grabs for the defibrillator, but Paul shocks him instead. The detectives discover Abe's chamber empty. Paul gives Abe adrenaline to wake him up, followed by morphine. The detectives discover on the CCTV that Paul has Abe. Paul and Abe exit the lift and begin running, with the investigators pursuing. They hurry up the steps, narrowly escaping through a gate. When they come across Jones, Abe accelerates, and they manage to pass him. Paul tells Abe about the threat to his wife and unborn child. Abe, angry, phones his brother. They plan a meeting place, and Abe insists that his brother should not hurt Paul's wife or child. Paul speaks briefly with his wife over the phone before his brother, Mateo, discloses his identity. Big D is apparently putting pressure on the brothers. Paul's wife, acting fatigue, seizes the opportunity to elbow Mateo and flees. Mateo, with gun in hand, advises her not to screw about or she will be in danger. The other duo visits a homeless shelter, where Paul examines Lewis's card. Meanwhile, Lewis inquires into the relationship between the 2 brothers and the district attorney's office. According to Masterson, Mateo risked a 10-year prison sentence, but Abe provided the now-deceased Joshua a drive containing evidence against corrupt police personnel. Returning to a nervous Paul, Abe advises him to sell his car and go home. However, Paul disagrees and pursues Abe. He fires a shot near Abe, insisting that Abe join him. Abe first refuses, but agrees when he sees he needs to see a doctor to avoid falling. They travel to a station where the brothers intend to meet. Abe alerts Mateo of a trap, but communication problems cause Abe to create a diversion. Taryn tries to flee but is apprehended by Mateo. When the cops spot them, a chase begins. Taryn cries as they dodge cars and accelerate away. Mateo's driving leads two police vehicles to collide, allowing them to flee. Paul and Abe both escape, with Abe requiring an additional dose of morphine. Suddenly, Paul is attacked, but Abe overcomes the attacker in a car wash and steals his radio and police badge, indicating trouble. They are obliged to take a car from an elderly woman, and the detectives are promptly called. The police attempt to trap them but are unsuccessful, and they are forced to confront the detectives. Paul speeds the car, following Abe's instructions. They quickly stop, forming a barrier, and flee on foot. Paul chooses to seek refuge and escape at Pop's, a friend's home. Mateo apologizes to Taryn for involving her, but she is concerned about herself and her unborn child. Despite her pleas, Mateo refuses to let her leave and tells her about how he and his brother have lived alone since childhood. Mateo enters a clandestine warehouse, unaware that he is being watched. Mateo tells Taryn that she can leave the warehouse once Abe comes. He stores the duffel bag he acquired from his brother and receives another negative message from Big D. Abe and Paul visit a man known as Big Cheetah. Abe approaches Cheetah for a favor, but he denies having any to offer. As they talk, Paul charges his phone and gets a call from Mateo. He responds just as Abe is handed the car keys. Abe then sees Paul on the phone and points a gun at him until he speaks with his brother. A warning message arrives, and Abe, holding Paul at gunpoint, informs him that this could result in his wife's death. Taryn's labor is triggered simultaneously by the day's stress. Concurrently, the detectives and another cop raid a pawnshop. Gunfire breaks out, and Paul is cornered by Masterson. Lewis shoots Cheetah and savagely beats an unarmed Abe, asking for the drive. Not finding anything, she grabs Abe's gun, threatens him, and wonders if she'll orchestrate this like Joshua's murder. Masterson knows Lewis is corrupt, responsible for Joshua's death, and has framed Abe. Lewis shoots Masterson and arranges a cover narrative with Jones while delaying the approaching cops. Just as Jones is about to execute Abe, Paul steps in, shooting him twice. Despite their astonishment, Paul and Abe manage to escape. Lewis recognizes the reality of her situation after discovering Jones's death. Mateo gently puts Taryn down at the warehouse, but she insists on going to the hospital to give birth. Mateo agrees, but he wants to tell his brother first. As he exits, he is shot. Taryn seeks cover as a big adversary begins to attack him. Mateo viciously punches the man, but as he is overpowered, Taryn tries to help but is grabbed at gunpoint. The assailant then shoots Mateo. The scene turns to Paul, who is losing his cool. Abe tries to calm him down, but Paul is dealing with the reality that he recently shot a police officer. Shortly later, they arrive at the warehouse and discover a blood trail that leads to Mateo, who is severely injured. As a nurse, Paul does anything he can to help him. Mateo tells him that his wife has been abducted, and Paul notes Mateo's significant blood loss. While Mateo strains to breathe, Abe consoles him as much as he can till Mateo passes away. Paul notices this and realizes the brothers were just trying to survive the rough streets together. Meanwhile, the thug who kidnapped Taryn meets with Lewis, revealing that he is a corrupt cop. Lewis tells him to erase all evidence from the pawn store and bring Taryn inside. Back with Paul and Abe, Paul bandages up a gash Abe had during the police chase and reveals that he and his wife are expecting a newborn boy. Abe retrieves the duffel bag containing the drive and his gun and prepares to take down every corrupt police officer. Despite Paul's attempts to persuade him otherwise, Abe insists it is the only way to save his wife. Paul recommends getting the footage from the pawn shop to incriminate Lewis. Taryn is brought inside the police station, where Lewis accuses Paul of being to blame for her partner's death and promises revenge. Abe and Paul arrive at a trap house looking for Big D. He appears shortly, but he is not as imposing as expected. He confronts Abe for showing up while his guys are pursuing him. Abe offers the cash from the bag, but Big D believes it is insufficient and instructs his men to assault. However, after unlocking a flash disk, the men get terrified and see they have overreacted. Abe discloses that the drive has corrupt policemen names, residences, secret bank accounts, and passwords, which pleases Big D. He welcomes Abe and Paul inside. Meanwhile, Lewis and her accomplice begin destroying evidence from the pawn shop. Looking at Taryn, Lewis decides to contact Paul. She tells him plainly that his wife is in labor and may not live long. She gives him the coordinates and an hour to arrive. Big D informs Abe and Paul that an insider has told them that Paul's wife is being held in a drug trafficker's building. Curious about the whole story, Big D listens as Abe describes how his brother faced a decade in prison and how he brokered a bargain, the drive, in exchange for his brother's release, which required a personal transfer. Abe recalls finding Joshua dead and just escaping through a window. The two are then dressed in police clothes, with Big D declaring they are now deputized. He and his troops went out, with Big D acting as if directing a film. Paul alerts Lewis of his arrival at the specified location. Big D starts a scene in which a car is pushed down the street, ignited with a Molotov cocktail, and collides with a police car, resulting in an explosion near a police station. Paul contacts 911 to report the fire, which brings cops to the site. As Lewis arrives at the fire scene, an ambulance approaches, marking the time for Paul and Abe to act. Taryn's water breaks as she is hidden inside the building. Using the bustle as cover, Paul and a pretend injured Abe slip into the police station. They walk the corridors as Taryn is discovered and roughed up by the crooked cop. Lewis enters the police station, but is immediately confronted by Abe, who holds her at gunpoint and disarms her. Meanwhile, Paul comes to the sound of his wife's screams and attacks the corrupt cop. A heated battle ensues, with Paul first struggling before stabbing the cop with a syringe. He then rushes to his wife, while Abe pushes Lewis to the floor. Lewis complains about the scope of the corruption, unaware that there was a hidden camera at the pawn shop, making her realize the gravity of the problem. As she continues to yell, Abe silences her with a powerful kick. Outside, Big D's associate declares that he has captured the vital film, signaling the end of his role. News reporters are nearby, covering the scene. Abe approaches one of them, hands over the hidden camera, and finally allows himself to relax and smile. Taryn is currently giving birth inside. Lewis regains awake, sees her own face on the news, and discovers a gun nearby. As she lunges for her gun, police officers swarm the room. She tries to fire but is shot down by cops. 1 year later, Paul is having fun with his son as they celebrate his first birthday. They bring out the birthday cake, and Paul gets a heartfelt greeting from Abe. A family of 3 poses for a snapshot. The image transitions to Abe driving and smiling as he stares at the photo of the birthday cake, satisfied with the situation. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more of these recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.